Hello, I'm Dr. James Bogash, expert in health and longevity and creator of Bogash Life and Balance. And today we're going to talk about a scary scenario that can happen called Guillain-Barre syndrome, where essentially your body attacks its own nerves, specifically the peripheral nerves, as opposed to like MS, which attacks the central nervous system. But 30% of these patients end up on a ventilator, so it's a scary potential outcome. And there have always been some things that we've kind of looked at that might have increased the risk, but this particular study really found some very strong links between a particular scenario and developing GBS. Because anything that we can do to stop this from happening makes a lot of sense. And it shouldn't surprise you that this has links to the microbiome and the gut bacteria, and how much we know that that plays a role in autoimmunity. So anybody with an autoimmune condition, whether it's asthma or MS or rheumatoid arthritis or psoriasis, needs to focus on the gut. So this should come as no surprise when a study out of Denmark looking at a little over 2,400 cases of GBS found that there were very strong links with people who had were diagnosed with rephrase that, in the hospital with hospital diagnosed infections, and those people that had antibiotics. So they each had their own risk. In people who had these infections, typically lower respiratory, so we're looking at like pneumonia, we're looking at GI infections, we're looking at septicemia. All of those can be potentially dangerous scenarios and life-threatening, especially septicemia and pneumonia if it gets out of control. GI tract, it depends on what it is. Certainly something like C. diff can be life-threatening if somebody can't stop or control the infection. But the people who had the hospital-diagnosed infection, 4.3 of them later went on to, in the study, and they compared it to controls, 4.3% later went on to develop GBS. Only 0.3% of those, the controls who weren't hospitalized, developed GBS. So that's almost 14 times more likely to develop GBS if you had been in the hospital with some type of an infection. And then if antibiotics were brought into play, that was 22.4% of the patients who developed GBS were given antibiotics versus 7.8%. So that's a 3.5 times greater. So clearly, having some type of an infection and getting that infection treated with antibiotics greatly increased the risk of GBS. But that makes complete sense because we know how much the microbiome plays a role in what our immune system does. And so if it's not healthy to start with, we may be at increased, quite confidently I can say we're at increased risk of things like GI infection, kidney infections, and upper and lower respiratory tract infections. So if we really piece this apart, the microbiome probably plays a huge role in developing the infection in the first place that puts somebody in the hospital, and then the antibiotics clearly just destroy that. So it all boils down to the healthier your microbiome is, the less likely something like GBS is going to happen to you. And GBS is a very scary scenario for a lot of people. They can end up paralyzed, as I mentioned, on a ventilator. Most people survive, but it's a scary time for these people. So if there's anything that we can do to protect ourselves from something like that happening, and focusing on the microbiome certainly makes a lot of sense, then that is time and effort well spent. As always, I'll post a link to this particular study in the description. Make sure you like this video, share it with somebody who you think needs the information, and subscribe to the channel.